Greetings, I'm Chuck Lennox. I am the coordinator of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation, which is an organization of professional interpretive groups from around the world that work to promote heritage interpretation in all its forms. I want to welcome you to our webinar series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation, and I think you'll really enjoy these presentations from the various groups and other speakers from around the world. I hope you'll gain a new perspective of heritage interpretation. Let's introduce our member groups.
Hello, my name is Jackie Lee, and I am the chair of AHI, the Association for Heritage Interpretation for Britain and Ireland. And we are absolutely delighted to be part of the GAHI webinar series.
Hello from Interpret Europe. Our community is also happily contributing success stories to this Global Excellence webinar series. Lean back and enjoy.
Hi, my name is Kylie Christian and I'm President of Interpretation Australia. I would like to welcome you to this year's Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation's webinar series. We have a great group of discussions and presentations for you from all around the world, so I do hope to see you online.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. My name is Nick and I am the chair of the Interpretation Network of New Zealand. We are a network designed to bring together interpretation professionals and showcase the best practice happening around our beautiful country of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Hola, mi nombre es Antonieta Jiménez, soy fundadora y directora de Interpat MX, la Asociación Mexicana de Intérpretes del Patrimonio, una asociación fundada recientemente en 2019, y a nombre de la Junta Directiva quiero transmitirles nuestro enorme gusto y entusiasmo de ser parte de esta alianza global.
Hello, bonjour, je m'appelle Jennifer Dick. I'm the chair of Interpretation Canada. We are a community that supports, engages, and inspires heritage interpreters across Canada.
Hi there, I am Paul Caputo. I'm the executive director with the National Association for Interpretation in the United States. We are so proud to be one of the organizing partners of the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation Excellence in Interpretation series. So proud to be part of this organization. Right now, 7 organizing partners from around the world. Thank you all for being part of such an inspiring and amazing profession.
Hi, I'm Tracy Gage, Executive Director of the Interpretive Guides Association, which is a Canadian-based interpretive guide training and certification organization, presently representing close to 2,000 certified members who work as interpretive guides, as educators, and as outdoor leaders internationally. We're proud to be part of the Global Alliance of Heritage Interpretation's family of professionals, and we're excited to explore the world of interpretation with you.
Well, good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you might be in the world. My name is Chuck Lennox with the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation. I want to welcome you to our second webinar this year in our series, Global Excellence in Heritage Interpretation, today hosted by Interpretation Canada. Today's webinar is titled New Voices at the Table, Using Interdisciplinary Interpretive Planning to Transform Visitor Experiences. As the webinar is underway, please put any questions you might have in the Q&A or the chat. We'll be monitoring those questions and then answering them at the end of the talk. And let me pass the screen over to my colleague, Jen Dick, who is chair of Interpretation Canada, to introduce our speakers. Thank you. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much, Chuck, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Good day. Bonjour et bienvenue à tous. Je suis très heureuse de vous accueillir aujourd'hui. I'm Jen Dick, the chair of the Board of Directors for Interpretation Canada, which is a wonderful group of volunteers who connect interpreters across the country. And I would like to begin our time today in gratitude and also take the time to acknowledge the diverse environments that have been stewarded since time immemorial by the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island and the lands that we call Canada. And I'm connecting with all of you today from Waterloo. Et je veux rendre hommage aux 6 nations du territoire de la Rivière-Grand et à la Première Nation des Mississauga de Crédit, et j'ai l'honneur de vivre et de travailler sur les territoires des nations Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, et Huron-Wendat. And I'm really pleased today to introduce you to Lauryn, who is a board member with Interpretation Canada and a very skilled interpretive planner. And I hope you all enjoy her talk and take away some wonderful tips and tidbits.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, for the introduction. I'm just going to pop my screen up here and I'll get started. Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. It's truly a pleasure to be able to come and share and have dialogue with so many exceptional folks from around the world. It's an honor to represent Interpretation Canada. My name is Lauryn. I'll start with, oh, come on, slide. Sorry, folks. My apologies. There we go. I'll start with an introduction of who I am. So my name is Lauryn Record. I am the Senior Strategist of Interpretive Planning and Creative Services at the Wilder Institute in Calgary Zoo, which is located in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Before I begin today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge where I'm speaking to you from, because acknowledging where we are is an important part of the interpretive journey for this project that we're going to talk about today. And I'm speaking to you from a sacred place known to the Blackfoot people as Smokinstis. And this has been a gathering place for thousands of years for people to come together, to build memories, to share, and to learn from each other. And even across the digital platform, I believe that we are sharing and learning from each other, and that there's a lot of power in that. So I speak to you from Smokinstis, which is on the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda, so Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Good Stoney First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. And Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation Region 3. And we start by acknowledging the number of people who've come before me to this place to share their stories, as those stories informed this project. So today we're going to be exploring a case study of one particular project at the Wilder Institute Calgary Zoo, but extrapolating that into some bigger picture topics in interpretation and interpretive planning, in how we advocate for new voices at the table. This talk is going to look both at new voices at the project table, so within an organization, and how I was able to advocate for the voice of interpretation right from the outset in the engineering architectural design of this project, as well as amplify underrepresented and new voices through the interpretive plan itself. And we'll be focusing primarily on the voices of artists and of Indigenous peoples in this project. I'm looking forward to your questions and to some dialogue and discussion after. Sure everybody can hear me. Is the sound okay? I apologize for the echo. I have switched to headphones, but if it's still there, my apologies.
Yep, we can hear you, Lauren.
Great, thank you. Okay, so today we're going to go over a little bit of the project so you know what on earth I'm talking about. What is Wild Canada? What is the Calgary Zoo? We're going to talk about some of the highlights from the interpretive plan, as well as how we brought the interpretive voice to the construction of this project. We're going to go through the narrative approach to the signage and to the storytelling, talk about art. We're going to talk about truth and reconciliation regarding Indigenous peoples, and share a video of the project, and then we'll have time for some discussion. So a little bit of background. The Wilder Institute Calgary Zoo is nearly 100 years old. This section is one entire zone of our site. It comprises about 30 acres of space and 14 animal habitats. This project has roots in 2020 when we decided to renovate the otter habitat. And then in 2021, we embarked on a journey to re-envision the entire zone by adding an extraordinary new sanctuary space for rescued polar bears. But that required moving the caribou and moving the whooping crane. And then we thought, oh, you know what, while we're at it, let's just take a look at these other older habitats need some work. And by 2023, we said we need to just redo the whole thing. So this was a total reimagining of an entire zone. It was the largest capital project in the Wilder Institute Calgary Zoo's history. And it involved a massive interpretive plan, more than, I have a little bit by the numbers, but 14 animal habitats over 21 acres, 1 building, 5 project managers, 22 unique art installations, 7 different capital projects, 2 architecture teams, 142 interpretive signs, but one interpretive plan. So all of this fell under one interpretive plan, one interpretive planner, which was me. And I'm going to guide you through a little bit of what happened with this project. Just so that you are familiar a little bit, I know this is a site plan. If you don't know the whole zoo, that's okay. But just to give you a little bit of sense, there are a number of different habitats. The large area in the middle is the new polar bear habitat. And I want to start today by talking a little bit about my role on this project. So this project had an overall vision, and one of the really intentional things that we've done at Calgary Zoo is start every project with an interpretive vision. Although we know there's other reasons we do projects, we do them to create new spaces for animals, to improve animal well-being, to improve visitor experience. But every decision we make in a project is guided by an overall interpretive story and vision. And we moved to this model a few years ago, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, when we realized that interpretation was coming at the tail end of a capital project. All of the architectural work was done, colors were chosen, habitats were chosen, and then signage teams came in and felt like they had to fit a story into a space. And we found that that wasn't working, or it wasn't creating experiences that were as powerful as they could be, because they were being added at the tail end. And interpretive planners, signage designers were kind of stuck with whatever they inherited from the project. And so we made some really intentional choices to bring the interpretive planner, which is me, into the capital project right from the outside, the moment that project gets approved. So this project had a vision to reflect our own human relationship with land across Canadian landscapes, to deepen emotional connections to wildlife and foster a sense of hope, and to inspire action. And so these 3 pillars shaped my consultancy and the way that I inputted into the project, which is what we're going to talk about. So the way that I approach interpretive planning is with pillars. And we all know that interpretive signage is a major pillar in any interpretive plan. When we go on a guided hike, when we visit a museum, when we visit a nature center, we know there's going to be signage. For me, the signage is almost secondary to some of these other pieces because we know that it's going to happen. But we also know that our visitors engage with spaces in many different ways. And signage reaches subsets of our visitor audiences. It adds visual accention to a space, but it isn't always the only way that people interact with a space. So for my approach has 4 other pillars. So one is technology. One is understanding how technology is going to augment and enhance the interpretive experience for us, where we can use it strategically. One of the tricky things with this site in particular is that it's almost entirely outdoors. So there is some technology and some components to that, but we're not looking at an indoor space where we have a lot of different options. And then the other 3 are ways, I guess, that we moved or we challenged a little bit of maybe the norm. And so one of the most significant departures from tradition in this space is the infusion of art. We worked with many different artist teams, individuals to bring in more than 22 unique art pieces into this project. And we'll talk about that as a strategy a little later on today. The 4th pillar is play. We are a zoo. We welcome many young child visitors. We want to create experiential opportunities, and we want kids to be able to experience parallel play and empathy building. So the play is a really important part of what informed a lot of the infrastructure decisions in this project. And the last is theming. One of the main goals of this project was to transport visitors to the wild habitats of these species. And we do that by taking them out of the Calgary landscape into immersive and ecologically appropriate theming. So these are what we call the pillars, the interpretation pillars of what the plan was built on. So we had some infrastructure objectives, and knowing these objectives from the beginning helped frame my input into this project. So I wanted to create an immersive experience that evoked the atmosphere and feel of unique ecological zones in Canada and aligned with the architectural and landscape design. So one of the most important things that we've been able to do here at the zoo is have the interpretive planner sit on the architectural design team. And contribute to the architectural design decisions. So from everything from the type of planting, the type of rock ecology, rock geology, planting ecology, rock geology, pardon me, the way that we make choices in finishings, in design, because we have a deep, in-depth knowledge of what the story that we're trying to create is. And then augmenting and bringing that story to life through signage, through art installations, through play that are very intentionally designed to encourage reflection upon relationship with the land in Canada and build empathy and generate dialogue. So every decision we made in signage and art was meant to spark curiosity, to spur a conversation between people who are, ideally folks who didn't even come to the zoo together, but we'll settle for the people who came with their friends and family. To integrate some new digital experiences, and then to really increase the capacity for artists to bring their work into the zone by teaming them up with fabricators. So what did it mean to have a voice at the project table? It meant that every decision we made in this room that you can see on the screen is an integrated project delivery team. This is full of engineers, civil engineers, structural engineers, architects, landscape designers, and then the contractors as well, mechanical contractors, landscaping contractors, the builder. And I sat in this room for 2 days a week for a year. And whenever we were building things, we thought about visitor circulation, flow. We thought about pinch points and dwell times and leg points, and the interpretive lens was able to understand how people would experience this space. So although we were building it for animals, this was one of the first, moves forward in centering the visitor in this experience and understanding what does their sight line of the habitat look like? Where are they going to? What is the vantage point? How does this reflect the story? And I think this has been a conversation that interpreters have often been left out of, or who I mentioned before, they've inherited it later. Someone else has done all the design work and they get these pictures and they go, okay, I'll write some signs. But interpretation, I believe, is so much more than signage. Interpretation is meaning making and storytelling, and that can come through in so many different ways. And so there are many decisions that were made in this project that only happened because there was an interpretive voice at this table. So one of the things I wanted, folks to take away from this webinar today is the importance and the value of the work that we do and how it can influence architectural design. After this project opened, one of the comments we received was how cohesive this experience is. Every detail is intentional. Everything was done and every choice was made knowing what the story and the ultimate pursuit was. And when you have a big zone like this, being able to create cohesion across 14 animal habitats is something that's really quite powerful. So, if you are in an interpretive planning role or an interpreter at your site and there are capital projects, I encourage you to ask where the interpretive voice is and if it can be included at the table early, because in my experience with this organization, it frequently was not included until too late in the game, until the last 5 or 6 years or so. And since we've made a very intentional decision to include that voice at the beginning, we've seen a huge, huge leap forward in the cohesion and the overall experience. So as we built our infrastructure approach, we also had a narrative approach. And I'm not going to spend as much time on this, but I just wanted to sort of share some of the thoughts that we were looking at, which was to use an ecological storytelling approach. And what I mean by that is that animals don't exist in isolation. They may be at the zoo in a habitat, but in the wild, that's not how they exist, and none of us exist. We all coexist in this world together. So an ecological approach helps us understand what's happening at the ecosystem level, and it makes it a little bit more real and relatable than just, a polar bear habitat. So you're not at a polar bear habitat, you've been transported to a tundra. We wanted to deepen our visitors' understanding of the complex challenges facing Canadian wildlife in the face of climate change and habitat loss, but with a sense of hope. Hopelessness and climate grief are very real, and we want people to feel inspired. We're going to spend some time today talking about Indigenous ways of knowing, but we wanted to build authentic relationships with artists and knowledge keepers to ensure that work is done well and properly. The Wilderness Zoo Calgary Zoo is a conservation organization, and so it is important to us to weave our mission. If we're not doing mission-based work, what are we doing? So understanding at your core what the mission of your organization is, I acknowledge that a different organization might have told this story differently, and that's okay, because it's important that this story speaks to this organization. And then we also want to talk about the animal well-being, the husbandry, the care, and the why these animals are here with us in the first place. So the interpretive theme for this project was that the future of Canada's iconic wild places depends on restoring balance between people, land, and wildlife. We used a braid motif, the idea that animals, people, and land are interconnected and stronger together than they are apart. So this visual motif actually shows up throughout the signage as a way of providing a framing structure, so that when you have 142 signs, you have cohesion in the way that the stories are told and some of the visuals, but without repetition. The signage is all unique, but it feels cohesive. And you'll see that when I show a video a little bit later. So we talked about the ecological approach, there's approach to animal well-being. You can see we use some playful headlines to attract the visitor into kind of gaining some deeper understanding about the questions they're asking. So, dive into the otter pool, or why is this polar bear outside in the sunshine? This stream of signage answers. This project also marked a significant move forward in talking about climate science for our organization. Alberta has been a little bit more challenging to talk about climate change, but that's really changed in the last few years, as well as bringing the polar bears to the zoo required some significant requirements from the government of Manitoba around communicating on climate science. And then action. Action is one of the pillars of our work. And conservation. So we have a 4-pillared approach to conservation action messaging and advocating for awareness, advocacy, actions. So I just wanted to gloss over that. I didn't spend a ton of time there because what I want to talk about most are those new voices at the table. So historically at the zoo and in other places, we've used art to add, some atmosphere, some theming, make a place pretty, but we haven't strategically used art to advance a story. And art has a real power of connecting with people in a different way because it resonates with our emotional core differently sometimes than words or than science. And so for a traditionally scientific, science-based organization like the zoo, we decided on this project to try something different. And instead of bringing people more science and more facts and even more stories about animals, we thought to connect them with their emotional core through art. So each art piece is different. And there were sort of a vision behind how this could look. And so when I pitched this concept to our executive, it was a real feeling of, well, what would this look like? What would an arts infusion, an arts takeover mean to a zoo? So there were a few goals and intentions. One was to use a large-scale public art piece to set tone. Many of us have been to a museum or to a space where you go through a place-setting moment, where when you step into somewhere new, whether it's through atmosphere, whether it's through a pre-show or other tool, the story is framed for you. And that's really powerful because it gets us to be in the right mindset. It helps us leave the world behind and be ready to embrace what comes. And so for a zoo to do that is a little bit new. We have big, signage, but we wanted to use a public art piece to get people to stop thinking about sunscreen and French fries and when am I going to have lunch and where's the bathroom, to going, I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to get ready for this experience. We wanted to pair artists with fabrication teams. So public art or art in an outdoor setting is not something that every artist has access to. If you are a canvas painter, you may not have access to doing that work on a large scale outside. And so we created an opportunity to pair artists with fabrication teams who could help them scale up their work to a big public outdoor durable setting. We wanted to amplify the work of Indigenous artists. That was really important because we're wanting to center and really appreciate the Indigenous voices in this project. We also wanted to ensure that artists were compensated and recognized appropriately. This is something that is a challenge in the art space, is understanding what is art worth. How much is it fair to charge for something? And we wanted to do a lot of learning in this space about putting out a call for artists and appropriate artist compensation, as well as recognition. One of the other interesting challenges here was creating space for the artist's voice and perspective while still aligning with our mission. So we wanted to not prescribe what the artist had to do. We've done that in the past where we've commissioned a piece. We've said, I would like a sculpture of a grizzly bear. Here are the dimensions of a grizzly bear. Here are the reference photos of a grizzly bear. Do that. That leaves no room for the artist. But we also want to understand that if we're going to put a piece on our site, it needs to accurately represent our voice. It needs to be hopeful. It needs to be positive. It needs to not be overly anthropomorphic and, cartoonish, because that's not our brand. So we created some constraints around art that still allowed a lot of room for the artist's voice. And then we also want cohesion. We didn't want hodgepodge. Anybody who knows me knows I hate hodgepodge. So understanding materiality, understanding some of the mounting structures and the ways that we could add cohesion while still not limiting this. So we had some learnings in this space, and I wanted to share those learnings in case others were wanting to go down this path. So one of the biggest ones was funding this project. So a zoo interpretive baseline budget doesn't usually have room for a lot of art. And understanding, as I said, that artists need to be compensated fairly is really important. But what art allows a space like a zoo to do is potentially reach a donor base that is more part of the arts community and open doors to untapped funding sources. And one of the most amazing parts of this project was in sharing this artistic vision with a local arts-based philanthropist as well as a government body. There was a lot of interest in this. We actually fully funded the entire art scope outside of the zoo's budget. So there was additional funding brought in and significant funding to be able to fund all 22 art pieces fully external. And that's because there are individuals in the arts philanthropy community, there are artist grants, both that you as an organization can apply for in Canada and perhaps globally, as well as that the artists themselves can. Another learning was around open calls for artists and adjudicating those. So as a zoo, we don't have an arts adjudication committee. We don't have internal expertise in adjudicating an open call. So we found our local Calgary Arts Development Organization, and we had a lot of conversations about how do we do this? How do we do this transparently? How do we build an artist call? How do we adjudicate one? And so if this is a road that your organization is interested in going down, partnering with your local arts organization can help inform perspectives that you don't have. What is art worth was a really interesting learning and understanding, because making sure that an artist is appropriately compensated is tricky. So there were some learnings in this space of what does an artist who's consulting or designing a concept and what's going to be a large sculpture, how much of that large sculpture is appropriate for their compensation versus the production of that sculpture. What does the artist, do they set their own fees? Some artists do. So we tried a few different models on this project. When we put out an open call, we said, here is the project, this is what we are paying for it, apply if interested. Other artists where we said, hey, I'd really like to commission a piece from you, like this one you can see here. What would you charge? What is your rate for this? So we tried some different models. I think there's still some learning to happen here. But the most important part was ensuring that artists felt fairly compensated for their time. A big learning for me was on artists and their timelines. Artists are unique, they are all individual, and sometimes artistic personalities and business timelines can be a little bit at odds with each other. So one of the strategies I employed on this project was a 1 month to 2 month buffer on the deadline that I told an artist was their deadline versus the deadline I knew it was. And that was very smart because almost everyone went over their deadlines. So just being aware that Western business practice and construction timelines and artist timelines are sometimes a little bit backwards. An interesting learning for me was on the executive buy-in. So I mentioned we're a zoo, art is new to us, and art is a personal thing. What I might gravitate to might be different than what somebody else might gravitate to. And so it was really interesting to see who decides what art is good. There are pieces in this collection that may not be something that resonates personally with me, but I still think they hold a ton of value, versus somebody else might be more drawn to something else. So helping our executive team understand what appropriate expectations were around art was a really interesting learning and journey and required time. The legal stuff, there are contracts. So every organization has to decide in consultation with their legal teams what is appropriate in terms of copyright, exhibition fees, reproduction rights. So what we did is, we've produced or we've commissioned this art piece. It is ours. It becomes part of our collection. And there's some agreement around it. The artist cannot reproduce it to be sold elsewhere, but also neither can we. So we don't produce their artwork and put it on t-shirts and make money off of it without additional compensation for the artist. So we have a contract that protects both us as the organization as well as the artist. And so far we've had no concerns with that. And then I mentioned a little bit about constraints versus artistic freedom. And that was really good learning because there were some artists who, while their work is exceptional, just doesn't align with us. And so building those constraints into the call and being open and honest from the very outset about what those constraints would be helped us navigate this space. So what was the result? So as I mentioned, there are more than 22 unique pieces of art across all media in many different styles throughout this project. In the upper left corner, you can see Aurora. Aurora is a large-scale steel sculpture of an Aurora Borealis that is augmented by a soundscape experience. And so as the visitor enters under it, they hear the sound of bison herds chopping, they hear polar bears breaking the ice, along with a Blackfoot drum, which is the heartbeat of this. And this is that framing device. You can't miss it. The sound transforms your experience, and it's really powerful. Throughout, there are also Indigenous art pieces. So in the top pictures you can see on the left-hand side of each of our ecological markers is a circular-ish art piece, and these were done by 7 Indigenous artists, each with a connection to the various ecological zones. We had mural work. There's a rock work mural down in the bottom left corner. Painting, so some of the originals, canvases, this piece of grizzly bear was originally a canvas art piece that has been reproduced on aluminum. We put the original in our administration building and the aluminum is on display. Large-scale fine detail mural work, as well as wildlife photography. So, when you come and you experience this, it's a really amazing way to accentuate and augment the experience in maybe a non-traditional interpretive lens. The other pillar that I wanted to talk about today was taking steps for truth and reconciliation, which is a journey that this organization has been on. I want to acknowledge that my organization is early in its journey and has a lot of learning and a lot of unlearning to do in this space. And truth and reconciliation is a moving forward to undo wrongs to Indigenous peoples in Canada and move forward in a good way and rebuild and reforge relationships that have been damaged to Canada. And so we really wanted to take steps in this space by infusing the perspective and Indigenous ways of knowing authentically and appropriately. And I can't stress those words enough that there was some misunderstanding at the outset of this project that I would just have Indigenous stories on signs. And anybody who has worked with Indigenous communities in an authentic and respectful way knows that stories are not taken. They are not earned, they are not owed, they are gifted, they are sacred. And so I went into this project not knowing how the Indigenous components would fuse together. Where would we get to on our journey? How much Indigenous representation would we have and from where? I didn't know because we needed to build relationship first. We needed consultation first. And we needed to understand, respect, appropriate customs and appropriate practices. I think zoos are a unique space in this landscape because not only do we acknowledge the nations of Treaty 7 where we are situated, where I acknowledge, in the heart of Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, the Métis Nation here, but we care for animals that are from across Canada and around the world. And it's really important that we don't say, does it make sense for a Blackfoot story about polar bear? Maybe, but an Inuit story might make a lot more sense. And so understanding both the ranges of our species as well as where we are. So we developed a 3-pronged approach to advancing and profiling language, to raising and amplifying the voices of artists, and to infusing traditional ecological knowledge where we could. And we want to do these things in a good way. So building relationships with Indigenous peoples means showing up. It means we're understanding and showing up in a reciprocal way, not in an extractive way. Doesn't mean give me your knowledge, share this with me, I want this. It means I want to take you for coffee. I want to build a relationship. I want to build a foundation of trust. I'm going to come to your community to show you that I care deeply. I'm going to understand your culturally appropriate business practices and protocols and customs, and I'm going to do the work. And the biggest thing I could say to anybody embarking on a journey of truth and reconciliation, of advancing Indigenous perspectives, is this work, to do it well, takes time. You cannot do this work well in a year. This project, the entire thing, start to finish, was about 2.5 years. And that's not nearly long enough in this space. So we made advances. We stepped forward, we built some relationships, we brought in some exceptional consultants into this space. But there was a lot of communication with my leadership team of understanding realistic expectations and realistic timelines. Would we have 40 signs in 40 different Indigenous languages telling stories? Absolutely not. Are we really proud of the few places where we do have stories and we do have language and we do have art? Yes. And that work is really important. And it's important that folks understand it needs to continue. It doesn't just end the day that this grand opening happened and this project opened. It carries on, and these relationships need to be built over the long term, and they need to be cherished. There were some learnings in this space that were just, kind of funny, but also really important. Understanding culturally appropriate business practice, understanding that this organization didn't have an ability or process in place to distribute an honorarium for someone's time and wisdom, because that wasn't something that we had a protocol around. So working with my controller and chief financial officer to understand how a cash honorarium transaction would work and look, because it was so foreign to their team that they hadn't done that. And I felt like my role in this space was both to engage with the consultants and to the community and to listen and to consult, but also to interpret that and share with my leadership team and act as the bridge between an executive and a leadership that have a lot of work to do and a lot of learning, as well as and sort of be the bridge between the communities. So, this work is really important. It takes time, and to do it in a good way means understanding your role and how you show up, and what it means to be reciprocal, and what it means to not be extractive. So I'm quite proud of where we've gotten, and we have some great relationships, but they are just at the beginning of their journey. So those are really the 3 things I wanted to focus on sharing today, and I'm going to share a little bit of where we got to, and then open the floor. I'd like to have dialogue. I do encourage questions. I have not looked at the question box yet, so we'll hopefully work through those things. But I just want to share, this is a video that just does a little bit of a walkthrough, just to give you a sense of, okay, you talked about all these things, Lauryn, what did you build? So, I apologize if it's a little laggy. You can see Aurora here. So this brings us around our bighorn sheep habitat, our signage. Oh, pardon me. These markers marked what we call the eco markers, so a transition to a new ecological zone. Here's our polar bear habitat, caribou habitat. This is one of those parallel play moments. Some highly tactile, really engaging signage, building a bear. This is one of my favorites. So on each of those eco markers, you can see they're anchored by an Indigenous art piece, along with the highly illustrative storytelling signage. And digital interactives. The braid and the aurora motif show up again in a few places to reinforce that braid narrative. These are hand-painted polar bear aluminum paintings. Oh, those are people, not polar bears. That means there are not polar bears in that habitat at the moment. And I'm gonna, we'll speed up. We're almost there. Head out of that zone there before YouTube sends us down a rabbit hole. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Perfect. Okay. And I hope I can see all the questions. Okay.
We have a couple questions in the Q&A, Lauren. If
Perfect.
you want to check there.
Perfect.
Thank you for sharing the wonderful perspective. And did you receive any audience feedback?
Yes, we did. It's been very well received. So we're fortunate to have a very large member audience, which is great because that means they know us before and after. And we've received comments like this set a new benchmark for the organization, a lot of love for the art. There's a lot of appreciation for those different perspectives. It's been very well received. And I have to tell you, a personal thing is there are architectural features that I know I was the advocate for, and seeing my child play with them and engage with them. At the beginning, I showed a photo of me inside the polar bear bubble, which is a child's bubble into the pool, and I fought for that bubble, and I got that bubble, and the day I saw my 3-year-old in that bubble was such a win. So. And then I see, can you tell us more about some of the constraints? Yes, so we spoke from a constraint perspective. There were some that were physical. So something like for the Indigenous art pieces, we said this needs to fit, your piece needs to fit an 18-inch circle, and it needs to reflect this particular landscape. So that was, some types of just physical constraint. Others were more philosophical or subject matter. So we said that in alignment with our mission, paintings need to portray, or artworks need to portray wildlife in an accurate and not anthropomorphic way. So, not cartoon, not, polar bear wearing a Santa hat, like nothing in that sort of space, and in a hopeful way. So not, emaciated polar bear dying from climate change, something that projects hope for the animal. That was about as far as we had to go. Any questions that artists had individually, they understood. And really there were no issues with any of the artists. There was only one tricky one from a logistical standpoint where one of the art pieces is a beautiful hand-carved wood panel that's painted to look like Métis beadwork. And we had to scan it to produce it outside because it had deer antler in it. So the original is actually far more beautiful than the reproduction, and that's the only one that I don't feel reproduced for an outdoor application, as well as potentially other things.
Question from Steve. Do you think this project would have been as successful without an interpretive strategy?
No. No, I do not.
You're not biased, right?
I'm not biased. I'm not biased at all. But also that's the feedback, is that the story shines through the architecture and that you can understand a lot of the intention just by some of the choices in the experience. And so I think the cohesion between the architecture, the landscape design, the habitat design, the visitor flow, the viewpoints, and then layering in the interpretive story, it all makes sense. There was nothing weird. And I think that's because when I sat in those project rooms, every decision we made, we ran it through the interpretive lens. And will this make sense? Will this work with the story? Does the infrastructure being put in for the signage make sense? I very recently retrofitted an old habitat to a new interpretive story, and it was so much more constraining because the actual infrastructure didn't even make sense. and it's not where I would have put anything, and I can tell that it came later on. So I think if I could, urge every interpreter who ever contributes in any way to a project is to keep talking about the importance of the interpretive story, even if it's a high level one, even if it's just those 3 vision statements, so that you sometimes know also what you're leaving on the cutting room floor. When we look at animals, we look at our sites and our stories, we could tell so many stories. I could redo this whole section with a completely different interpretive plan and tell something completely different. But that means I leave something out. And so there's lots of stories I didn't tell here. There's lots of signs that didn't make them off of the drafting table, and that's okay. But I think having that strategy in place knows what you're doing and also choosing not to do.
A question from Bill. What sort of reaction did you get from other planning disciplines at the design table?
Okay, sorry, I'm just, is this one in the, okay, I'm in the chat box now so I can see it and read them. Do you know there was a surprisingly large amount of appreciation, because I think a lot of the, particularly architectural and landscape folks, on this project, some of them were new to zoo design, so they really appreciated their own learning. Zoo design is its whole own can of worms, but they also really appreciated the visitor experience insights, because interpretive sites are different. They are different than, the landscape firm on this project had done many a public park, many a gathering space. They had never done a zoo. And so understanding how do zoo visitors, what are their motivations? What are they trying to do? What do they want? So those insights from the interpretive world were so valuable, and they were really appreciated. We had great rapport. We had great relationships. They actually far more appreciated being challenged than I might have thought when you put up your hand and go, hey, did we consider this? The only time it ever got tense was when it came down to budget, when I said, I really, really want this bubble. And they're like, Lauryn, that is a $90,000 bubble. Are we sure we need the bubble? Yes, we need the bubble. And the bubble is beloved, and children love their bubble. But sometimes you need the interpreter to fight for the things that really matter, because just another anecdote, I've been on other projects where, to be perfectly blunt, I went on maternity leave, and I came back, and all the cool interpretive features got axed, and they're gone. And it's so depressing. The signage is all there, but there were some really cool features that, due to value engineering, got taken out. And I think it's really cool when you can fight and advocate for the things that matter to the visitor, because sometimes that voice isn't always heard. So yes, hashtag we need the bubble, and we got the bubble, and if you ever come to Calgary, you can come take a picture of the bubble.
You mentioned wanting to generate dialogue between visitors. What did you do to encourage that, and how is it going?
It's going really well. So most of our signs have some sort of prompt. So we do prompting in a few different ways. So there are ones that are very much about just body movement. So there's a whole series for kids on moving like an animal. From this moment to this moment, animal like a grizzly bear. And I see parents facilitating this with their child, which is really cool. A number of our signs have a dialogic prompt on them. So they may ask you to ponder something. They may give you a would you rather, a consideration, I wonder why this. So we use a lot of sort of visitor first or person-centric pondering language, or if you could do this, what would you think? And a lot of questioning to try to get them to talk to each other. If someone can crack the code on getting visitors to talk to people they didn't come with, I will give them a medal. I'm still working on that. But from a dialogic perspective, I'm really pleased to see. I love undercover following visitors, not in a creepy way, I promise, but hearing them take in content and try to understand it for themselves is just so valuable.
How do you intend to protect interpretation as intellectual property?
Where's the question?
This is in Q&A from Norma.
Sorry, I keep going back and forth to the... Norma, could you clarify, do you mean my intellectual property? Do you mean the artists? I just would love a little bit of clarification in your question about whose intellectual property you are referring to. Or was it Indigenous people's intellectual property? If you could just clarify that in the question box, that would be so wonderful. And then I'll come back to it.
Would it be possible to share more about how you started the process of consultation with Indigenous community members and more about how you built those relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. This was an area of huge learning for me and how much time it takes to even build initial relationships. So in a traditional sort of Western business practice, the first thing we did was posted a job description for a consultant. We got nowhere. One of the most key things for us as this organization has a lot to learn and to grow in the driven reconciliation space is that advising us on the project was a consultant or an individual with lived experience as an Indigenous person. And by posting this in a very job posty HR kind of way, we didn't get a single Indigenous applicant at first. So we went, okay, hang on a second. In this particular role, we feel like that is really important. And so I ended up having a coffee with a friend who introduced me to a friend, who introduced me to their mother, who introduced me to their cousin. And that was the individual who came. And so I think by understanding how relationships are built in Indigenous communities, which is not in a post-it, transactional, here's the salary range, job description kind of way, that is a very Western, very colonial practice. And so relationship based on, hey, here's this thing I'm thinking about. What do you think? Do you know somebody who might be a great fit? And having a lot of conversations. I have had a lot of coffee, a lot of tea in the last 2 years with just showing up to ask the questions. I do think finding a person you can safely ask some of those questions of, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. When I started this work 3 years ago, I didn't have a lot of experience in this space, and it was really important to me to do it right. So I started with a coffee with a friend who I knew had been doing some work in this space, and having those conversations, and that's what has snowballed from relationship to relationship. We held a knowledge keeper roundtable moment here, and some of the elders that attended only came because someone else had said this is a trusted and safe space to have these conversations. Particularly for zoos and Indigenous communities have not always been in the same philosophy, because holding animals in human care isn't always at all it's a different philosophical perspective. And so building that relationship of trust, and these animals are well cared for, they experience good well-being, they're here for conservation purposes. A lot of that, that trust had to be built. So I would say it started with coffee. It started with understanding, in Canada and where I am, a tobacco offering is a really important place to understand and start. So even just understanding the cultural practices of the communities, either in your area or that you're working with, because they're going to be different. And everywhere, doesn't always have the same protocol.
Hi, Pam. A few more. Norma has clarified her question on, yes, the intellectual property on different levels. How might you protect the rights of the Indigenous community, organization, etc.?
Thanks, Norma. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so it's a little bit different case by case in that sort of space. So for the organization, intellectual property here, what we write on our signs, I guess, is ours. We've never had a thing where it's been taken, I guess. We would be protected from like a legal perspective, from like a, it's under our, it's not published under copyright. With the artists, we allowed them to retain their copyright, but we owned the piece, and then we put in pieces around reproduction rights. So we didn't take the copyright from the artist. I don't believe that that's fair. It's still their work, and every piece acknowledges their work, but we contractually said, okay, well, we won't reproduce and make money off of it. Please you don't reproduce and make money off of it. Can we come to this agreement? And every artist was quite happy. Some artists already had their own contracts because they were professionals. Some amateur artists did not. And so we provided them with hey, this is what our typical contract looks like. Are you comfortable with this? And then from an Indigenous perspective, this is something that we did come up with a lot. And so that meant that what was shared with us is that nation's intellectual property. They maintain the right. If they wanted it down, we would take it down. And so it's their story, it's their language, they own it, they have ownership, it does not become transferred to us. And if they ever ask us to change it, to remove it, that would be up to them.
Okay, I think we have time for two more. We've got a question from Pam and one from Keith. So Pam's question is, what's your advice for an interpretive planner who doesn't get invited to sit at these planning tables at their site? How do you get through the door besides using a sledgehammer?
So one thing I would say is that if you can write a really good business case, sometimes people, we know this as interpreters, sometimes folks see nothing but the bottom line and the dollar amount and the business case behind it. So when you can build in the business strategy to interpretation, you can open some of those doors by understanding the return on investment from repeat visitation, the value to membership increase. These are hard things to quantify, but I would say the shift here happened when we could show the financial ROI on interpretation. And it's not easy. I think this is one of the hardest things we do is measure interpretation in KPIs and dollar figures, but being able to do so that we did, years of exit surveys showing I bought my membership because the zoo reinvents itself. I value good experiences. Craft your surveys to give yourself the data that you will need to value interpretation. And when we can make the business case for it, we got the seat of the table.
Nice. It can be challenging when you're
it's
left out.
Easy. It's not easy, and helping folks understand the value of what we offer beyond the intrinsic value, because we all know there's intrinsic value, but if you can find the data that helps you sort of mine your site for the financial data, I think it's there.
Keith's question is, even though it's just completed, how did the team consider lifespan of this program? Refresh, revitalization, renewal? Was that part of the planning process?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So some of this, a lot of it is in materiality and is sort of the lifespan of the story. So a few things on the story perspective. One is we've deliberately left out things that would date themselves. So the content does not include something like there are 54 whooping cranes in the wild. It will be written in a way that talks about a recovery of whooping crane and the numbers increasing, but it does not date itself. Same thing with links to our conservation program. So conservation signage on our site changes all the time because of partners and change and projects that change. So we use the resurrection, thank you COVID, of the QR code, which I still can't get over, but we can link to more live things on that side. And then from a materiality perspective, we chose things that had a minimum of 10-year lifespan. So ideally, I don't actually want things to last forever. The signage I took out of Wild Canada had been there for 40 years. I actually don't want that. We want things to deteriorate around the 10-year mark so they intentionally get refreshed. But we chose, steel and wood and some substrates that have some really good durability. So every art piece was designed to last at least 10 years and some 20 for the big theming pieces.
Okay, one more. How do you stay the course over such a long project when faced with management that does not see the value in the interpretive vision, since the product isn't immediate?
You keep sharing the exciting tidbits that come along. So when you want to share with them updates that seem, fine for I'm going to call them the sexy updates, but, you just awarded the RFP on the concept design, share that package out. You just got a draft of a really neat sculpture concept, share that. Keep feeding and seeding the excitement. I will say that by other projects' perspectives, I would say this one was pretty fast. So from start to end in under 3 years, I'd say really the bulk of the work done in 2 years. So the momentum, we didn't really lose that. I can imagine on a longer haul project that would be tough, but keeping selling the vision of what you're trying to achieve and make sure that your voice is heard through regular updates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that visitor-centric approach. So I find in some cases when it's tough to pitch that Interp is valuable, I pitch that this is to improve the visitor experience. And if we're visitor-centric as an organization, then that can be helpful.
Yeah. And reminding, especially I think in a site that has sometimes a conflicting mission. I'll be perfectly honest with you. We pivoted our mission to a conservation organization. We focus on animal well-being. Sometimes visitor experience can take a back burner to those two things. And so having the interpretive voice, we also in that big room, we called it, we had an animal care voice. We didn't have a conservation voice because this wasn't really a conservation project, but we had, two voices that were consistently there from the zoo the entire time. One was mine and one was animal care. And that meant that every decision we made, we filtered through those two lenses. And I think it was one of the strongest decisions we could have made. Come to the zoo, come to Calgary.
Yes. Yes. Can't wait to see it, hopefully. It's a bit of a journey for me, but I'd love to see it. Thank you so much, Lauryn, for sharing. I've really appreciated all of your experience and wisdom through this, and be sure to check out the chat. There's some lovely bravos and thank yous in there for you. And thank you everyone for joining and for all of your amazing questions. We are glad that you could join us for the June webinar for the Global Alliance for Heritage Interpretation, and we hope to see you at the next session.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if people will have more questions, but I really appreciate everybody tuning in, and it's just so exciting to get to share this work around the world.
Wonderful.
Oh, Cam, thank you.
We'll end the call there so the recording stops.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.